This episode of the EV Resource Podcast is brought to you by Titan Auto and Tire. Titan has some of the very few independent auto repair shops in Central Virginia that are qualified to work on EVs and hybrids. And from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. Coming up this week, Mazda calls it quits for the MX-30, Chevy updates Blazer EV pricing, and a new report finds that EV charging is more expensive than filling up with gas. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 161 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. This week, I have 8 news stories to cover for you. I am super excited to get into this, especially the last one. This report I've been seeing pop up on social media quite a bit, sharing that charging an EV is more expensive than filling up a comparable gas or diesel vehicle. Obviously, those of us with practical real-world experience driving an electric vehicle know that this is not true. So I'm going to dive into this one and really get to the bottom of exactly how they got this data to produce the result that they came up with. But before I do that, I want to actually thank the Patreon supporters of EV Resource and my efforts here. First, instead of doing it at the end of the show, because I really want to showcase the generosity of this group of people. So at the director tier, we have Rajiv Narayan, Andy Cooper, and Ethan B. At the executive producer tier, Christopher Lawrence. And at the producer tier, Eric Weber, Charles Hall, Alan Michael, and Bruce Gallant. So thank you so much. I definitely really appreciate your support. And with that, let's get right into the news. So we'll start off the news this week with the report from Mazda that they are ending sales of the MX-30 EV for North America. And honestly, those of you who have been really paying attention to this vehicle should not be surprised at all. For the entire first half of this year, all the way through the end of June, Mazda sold 66. Only 66. And the reason being is that it just is not a competitive or a compelling option in the marketplace. You could easily say that the Mazda MX-30 EV was a mistake from the very beginning. They should never have made something that was so mismatched for the US market. It absolutely fell far short of any expectations for what a modern EV should be for North America. But we pretty much knew this coming in. I talked about it back in episode 77. Let's take a listen to what I had said back then. From the company that revolutionized the internal combustion world with the rotary engine, which arguably became a significant part of the brand's DNA and reputation, well, now they've given the world their first electric car. And it's clear that they don't care about their reputation, and electric vehicles are not in their DNA. What they've done here with the MX-30 is created a compliance car to compete with the best EVs from 10 years ago. Oh, and in true compliance car fashion, it's only available in California. Now, let's compare the first generation Nissan Leaf, okay, the 2010 Nissan Leaf, 11-year-old car, the 2013 Fiat 500e, and the new Mazda MX-30. Now, the first two there, obviously very much compliance cars. They were created just to satisfy the emissions standards that California and other CARB states were putting out. I'm going to give you the specifications of each car, but here's the catch. I'm not going to tell you which is which. You're going to have to guess which one the MX-30 is. And hey, you know what? I'm going to throw my own car into the mix just for fun, the 2016 Chevy Spark EV. So 3 compliance cars and the MX-30. Here's the specs. Let's see if you can figure out which one is brand new. Okay, so car number 1, 73-mile EPA range from a 24 kilowatt-hour battery pack, 0 to 60 in 9.9 seconds, and a top speed of 93 miles an hour. It is front-wheel drive, powered by an 80 kilowatt electric motor. DC fast charging is a blistering 50 kilowatts, and the MSRP for this car is $32,780. Car number 2, 100-mile EPA range from a 35.5 kilowatt-hour battery pack, 0 to 60 in 9 seconds, and a top speed of 87 miles an hour. Front-wheel drive powered by a 107 kilowatt electric motor, also 50 kilowatt DC fast charging speed, and the MSRP for this car is $33,470.
Car number 3, an 87-mile EPA range from a 24 kilowatt-hour battery pack, 0 to 60 in 8.4 seconds, and a top speed of 85 miles an hour. Front-wheel drive, powered by an 83 kilowatt electric motor. DC fast charging is not available. The MSRP for this car is $31,800. Car number 4, an 82-mile EPA range from a 21 kilowatt-hour battery pack, 0 to 60 in 7.3 seconds, a top speed of 90 miles an hour. Front-wheel drive powered by a 105 kilowatt motor, an optional 50 kilowatt DC fast charging, and the MSRP for this is $27,490. Now, all of those numbers are when these vehicles were new, and I phrased it that way so that it would all compare to the brand new MX-30. Okay, so you've probably already guessed which car it was, right? Right. And if it were competing with the rest of these cars from 5 to 10 years ago, then it would be quite a compelling option. It fits in very nicely with these other cars. But all of these older cars are available for less than half the cost now as used options. Let's take my car, for example. The 2016 Chevy Spark EV can be had for about $11,000 just about anywhere across the country. And for that price, you could buy a Spark EV for around town. And then with the difference you save by not buying the MX-30, you could actually buy a brand new Mazda CX-30 gas-burning SUV to have this space and similar size of the MX-30. So you could have two cars for the price of one, have all of the electric driving you could possibly want, and then for longer road trips, you'd have your gas-burning SUV. Now, for you EV purists out there, that might sound like heresy, but even Mazda are encouraging the buyers of the MX-30 to use gas-powered vehicles for longer trips. Take a look at this. Their, as they call it, MX-30 Elite Access Loaner Program. And it says, quote, as an MX-30 owner, you'll have the opportunity to experience the full family of Mazda vehicles with our MX-30 Elite Access Loaner Program. MX-30 owners can select a courtesy non-EV car up to 10 days a year for the first 3 years of ownership for a longer range trip or personal needs. End quote. So my take on this, it is clear that Mazda is either incompetent, incapable, or ingenuous about building EVs. And I'm of the opinion that they are all three. I guess my real only question is, who in their right mind would buy the MX-30, and what the was Mazda thinking when they decided that this was going to be a good EV for 2021?
Yeah, so needless to say, my opinion hasn't really changed that much in the last 2 years. And I've got nothing else. I mean, that I'd say pretty much covers it. So goodbye, Mazda MX-30. Good riddance. I don't think anybody's really going to miss you. Next, EVgo is hitting some milestones, making some big announcements, and generally, things are looking up for the charging network. Last Wednesday, the company shared that their revenues were up 457% over that of last year, and 66% of their total revenue was due to their Extend unit, which is a partnership between EVgo, GM, and Pilot Flying J. The three companies have banded together to build out EV charging at Pilot and Flying J locations all across the country. As a result, EVgo and GM also commissioned their 1,000th charging stall. In addition to that news, CEO Kathy Zoy announced that she will retire in November and be succeeded by board member Badar Khan. So, with support from GM and the partnerships with these other companies, things are looking up for EVgo, and I truly wish them all the success they deserve. GM announced that they are making some changes to the plans for the 2024 Chevy Blazer EV. They have dropped the base model, the 1LT. That is now gone. So the new base model is the 2LT trim, and that is actually considerably much more expensive than was previously announced by Chevy. Pricing for the front-wheel drive version of the 2LT trim hasn't been announced yet, but the all-wheel drive will start at $56,715 when it enters production this fall. The mid-spec RS all-wheel drive will go on sale this summer, and that now carries a price tag of $61,790. The top-level SS trim is now slated to enter production next spring. Chevy has declined to comment on any price changes regarding the SS, but honestly, it wouldn't be surprising if they hiked the price on that as well, especially given that the rear-wheel drive RS is encroaching on the top model's pricing territory. Information on the front drive RS and LT models is promised closer to their launch next year. What's interesting, though, because now this has removed the lowest price option for this, Chevy has said that to compensate and fill that gap in the marketplace, they are going to actually fill that with a more expensive option for the Equinox that is coming out as well. So what they're doing is essentially making both vehicles more expensive. Now, one thing I do want to point out in this story as well, I'll just make this kind of an update on GM's future announcements. GM did announce they are bringing the Bolt back. They apparently saw that there was a huge backlash when they announced that they were going to discontinue it. And their announcement says, we're bringing the Bolt back. But there's no pricing. There's no timeline. So reading between the lines, it's very clear to me that GM doesn't actually have any plans for the Bolt yet. They just saw that there was a lot of chatter and it was negative and it made them look bad. So they said, you know what, we're going to bring the Bolt back. And I think that actually works in their favor with all of this because now they can move the Equinox up in terms of price. They can, as they've done with the Blazer, move the pricing up. And then the Bolt will slide in at the very bottom of the marketplace where it has been. But I don't think we're going to see $25,000 to $30,000 pricing on that unless some things change between now and when they end up making that, whenever that might be. And honestly, I wouldn't even expect it in 2024. So if you are a Bolt fan and you're looking forward to the next generation where it's going to be on the Ultium platform and hopefully have much faster charging, be more efficient, just all the technology should be better, don't hold your breath. It might be a while. Next, I want to shift away from the North American market and talk about Europe for a minute. And I've said quite a lot that I look at Europe as being a way to see into the future for what we could expect here. They are usually about 5 years ahead, and often trends and even brands that are showing progress in Europe will make their way to North American shores in time. So I wanted to frame this next news story with that in mind because it wouldn't surprise me if we see this featured brand make their way to US shores sometime in the near future. While the top-selling EV year-to-date in Sweden is the Tesla Model Y, the brand that sat atop the sales charts in July was not Tesla, and it wasn't even a European automaker. No, it was China's BYD that grabbed first place, hitting a new monthly sales record with the BYD Atto 3, a mid-sized SUV that shares the segment with the Model Y, Volkswagen ID4, Kia EV6, and others. And now these numbers aren't exactly staggering, but keep in mind that Sweden isn't a very large country. The top 10 models sold didn't even break 1,000 units each for the month. The top 3 in July were, in third place, the BMW i4 with 385 units sold. And actually, as an aside, I recently drove the i4 M50, and I have to say it was really nice. I was impressed. In second place was the Volkswagen ID4 with 710 units sold. And of course, in first was the BYD Atto 3 with 721 units sold. As I mentioned, year to date, the Model Y is in the top spot. That currently has 8,901 units. But in July, they only sold 359. So I fully expect that we are going to see more Chinese brands doing really well. And as far as I'm concerned, it's only a matter of time before we see them come to North America. The only question that matters, though, is if North American buyers will be swayed by the Chinese automakers. And for those of you who might be thinking this, I'm not actually counting Volvo or Polestar as Chinese, even though they are owned by Geely, the Chinese parent company. But in terms of styling, company culture, materials, and everything else that makes those cars unique, they are still very much Nordic. So what I want to do is actually make the question of the week about this. Would you consider buying a car from a Chinese brand like BYD, NIO, XPeng, SAIC, Zeekr, or others? And there are many others. I will have more information on that during the question of the week segment, which is right after the news. Tesla is in the news, as they often are, and as usual, it is not positive. Tesla is taking some heat about their advertised estimated driving ranges for all vehicles. In fact, owners of Tesla vehicles in California have actually filed a proposed class action lawsuit that accuses Tesla of falsely inflating the range numbers for their vehicles. The lawsuit cites a Reuters article about an internal division of Tesla called the Diversion Team, whose entire purpose was to cancel as many range-related service appointments as possible in order to prevent service locations from becoming inundated with service visits related to range concerns from customers where the cars actually didn't have any problems. And I'm going to set that aside, because certainly I could spend a large amount of time questioning the business ethics and versus the effort to streamline the service process. But what that does highlight is a problem that the entire range concerns problem draws from, and in my opinion is one of the worst, if not the worst, problems that Tesla has. It's about communication. They're really bad at communicating with their customers, communicating internally, and generally with the public as well. And if you have owners that are seeing significantly reduced ranges compared to the numbers they are expecting, you don't necessarily have a technology problem. What you have is a communication problem. It's all about managing expectations. But there is some validity to the argument from the owners who have filed the lawsuit. Tesla has historically skirted to the very edge of what is legal and done everything they are allowed to do to make the range numbers as optimistic as possible. Written into the software, the range shown in car will actually be quite optimistic in the top half of the battery from 50 to 100%. And then as you get lower in the state of charge, it will adjust until you hit 0%, and that will be much more realistic. But then Tesla additionally has also built a buffer so that you can actually drive past 0% for many miles. And I've done this in actually more than 3 different Tesla vehicles, so I can attest to that part. I'm not sure how this lawsuit will play out. I honestly don't think that the lawsuit has much standing, as there are so many factors that will influence range. And maybe it's time we stop talking about range and instead focus on efficiency, charging speeds, and charging infrastructure. And I know it's a crazy idea, but really, if we told somebody to expect 4 miles per kilowatt hour instead of 300 miles of range, then they would think about the car like they always have with miles per gallon and adjust their expectations accordingly. Fisker is in the news, fresh off the launch of their first production vehicle, the Ocean SUV. They've now unveiled new vehicles for potential buyers to get excited about. The Alaska, which is an electric pickup truck, and smart move there if you ask me. The Pear EV, which is a smaller SUV crossover style vehicle, and they say that'll start at just shy of $30,000. The Force E, a rugged off-road version of the Ocean, and the Ronin, a 4-door supercar EV that promises a 600-mile range, 0 to 60 under 2 seconds, and more than 1,000 horsepower. All that with a price tag of $385,000. The Alaska, they say, will start at $45,400 and be built here in the U.S., with deliveries expected to begin as early as December of next year. And it's actually based on the Ocean, so that delivery timeline could possibly be fairly accurate, and it will definitely come before the Pear or the Ronin. The Pear is a smaller SUV crossover style vehicle with dual motors, 5 or 6 seat options. It will come packed with features and tech that you'd expect with vehicles that have a much higher price tag. But still, I have to admit I'm a little skeptical of that promising sub $30,000 price tag, but we'll see. Production for the Pear will take place at Foxconn's Lordstown plant and is estimated to start around mid-2025. Next, Volkswagen is eyeing up a partnership with Chinese EV startup Leapmotor to buy a new EV platform for an electric Jetta for the Chinese market. And that's actually their Jetta brand, not the Jetta vehicle. Jetta is a joint venture between Volkswagen and Chinese state-owned automaker FAW Group that doesn't currently sell any electric vehicles. Leapmotor is already planning to launch the platform's next generation in 2025, and with the new iteration, they're saying it will bring improvements in computing capabilities and smart cockpits. Rumors about Volkswagen holding talks with Leapmotor came after the German giant last week announced a partnership to develop EVs in China based on XPeng's Edward platform, on which the EV startup's G9 flagship SUV is built. Volkswagen also took a 4.99% stake in XPeng, worth $700 million. In addition to that deal, Volkswagen Group subsidiary Audi reached a deal with SAIC Motor to jointly develop EVs in a segment where the German premium brand does not, as of yet, have a presence in China. So while we're seeing Chinese brands make their way to Europe, we're seeing European brands really working to get a foothold in China as well, which makes sense on that side of it because China is the largest EV market in the world. So if they're going to have any success, they're likely going to find it there. All right, the last news story, as promised, is a big one. According to a new study by the Anderson Economic Group, filling up petrol in an internal combustion engine vehicle tends to be much cheaper than charging an EV in the United States. The study states that the average cost of filling up fuel on entry-level priced cars is around $9.78 per 100 miles driven. In comparison, the cost of charging entry-level EVs at home comes to about $12.55 and $15.97 at a public charging station for every 100 miles driven. The entry-level priced ICE cars mentioned in the study include the Honda Civic, Hyundai Elantra, Mitsubishi Mirage, and Nissan Versa, while entry-level EVs are the Nissan Leaf and Chevy Bolt. The story is said to be similar for mid-priced vehicles as well. The cost to fill up fuel on mid-priced segment cars like the Honda Accord, Toyota Camry, and Chevy Malibu on average comes to $11.08 per 100 miles. However, the cost of charging mid-priced EVs like the Kia EV6, Ford Mustang Mach-E, Tesla Model 3 and Y sits higher at $12.62 at home and $16.10 at a public charger for every 100 miles. The only area in their report where the cost of charging EVs is lower than filling up fuel is the luxury car segment. The BMW 5 Series, Porsche Macan, and Audi A6 have an average fuel up cost of $17.56 per 100 miles. On the other hand, the average cost of charging cars like the Porsche Taycan and Polestar 2 at home is $13.50 per 100 miles, and the average cost while charging them at a public charger does come up above the other ICE vehicles to $17.81. The group stated, quote, "With electricity prices trending up and gas prices going down, most traditional gas-powered vehicles cost less to drive than their EV counterparts in the first half of 2023. Drivers of luxury-priced electric vehicles still could save a little money compared to driving high-powered ICE vehicles, especially those needing premium gas," end quote. Now, as we've come to expect from the media, they'll often take a report like this, grab the bits that will make headlines, make it sound like the world is absolutely ending, and ignore any of the information in said report that might influence the article to be more moderate or even EV-friendly. We typically, as human beings, respond to extremes. So while it's no surprise that the headlines are that EVs cost more to fuel, the actual title of the report from AEG is "Some Cars Cheaper to Fuel with Gas Than Electric in 2023." So the first thing I really want to address is that they're saying some, not all, not most, not even many, unless you look at the actual link to the report. And in the link, they put many gas-powered cars cheaper to fuel than electric in 2023, where the report title itself is actually some. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I know Anderson Economic Group to be historically somewhat non-friendly to electric vehicle topics. And as a result of that, I wanted to dive into this a little further and really draw out the data that was used to determine that even some EVs are more costly to fill up compared to similar gas vehicles, because that is just not congruent with what I know and also what I've experienced and also what people I know who are EV owners have experienced. So there's a disconnect and I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is. The variables that AEG took into account considers 4 categories of real-world costs for both ICE vehicles and EVs, including energy, taxes, pump or charger, and deadhead miles. Costs are calculated for vehicles driving 12,000 purposeful miles per year, using energy prices, gas taxes, and EV registration fees in the Midwest or the state of Michigan. Representative models within segments were selected on the basis of sales volume and to include a variety of manufacturers. Entry, mid, and luxury segments are defined based on typical purchase price. They point in the 2023 report to their prior year study for readers to find out more about their methodology. In the report itself, there actually wasn't a whole lot of information provided. So I headed to the 2022 report to find out more about exactly how they're going about doing this. And they use 4 categories of direct monetary costs of fueling EVs and ICE vehicles. The first one is energy costs. That covers electricity provided and charged at residential or commercial utility rates. They include the per kilowatt hour charge in any session or time chargers, along with electricity losses through heat during the charging process. Secondly, excise taxes for roads. They are talking about EV highway registration fees, and they point out that these do vary by state or weight of vehicle. But of course, they mentioned in the 2023 report that they were focusing on the Midwest and or Michigan. They include the cost of the charger. So that's the third point. Cost of operating a commercial charger or the cost of installing and operating a residential charger. They say that these first 3 are calculated into the retail price of gasoline or diesel fuel. So they lump those together for ICE vehicles when comparing to these separate charges for EVs. And then lastly, the fourth point is deadhead miles, the distance to and from charging stations or to and from fueling stations. And they acknowledge that this is 0 for home charging, but make sure to mention that this is often considerable when using commercial chargers and varies significantly. So understanding their methodology is really key to understanding how the heck they are determining that EVs cost more to fuel than ICE vehicles. And I want to highlight the fact that they are including the cost of operating a commercial charger or the cost of installing and operating a residential charger into the cost of, quote, fueling an EV. And while it is important to keep in mind any necessary costs for charging equipment, I'm not sure I would lump that in with fueling costs so specifically. Chargers can often last for years and vary so much in cost that it's just a variable I think they should have really set aside, or maybe one that they'd be more clear about exactly how they're calculating that portion. But, they aren't exactly calculating the cost of a fuel pump for the ICE vehicles. They say that cost is calculated into the price of gasoline. Well, the same could be said for the cost of electricity that is paid when using a public charger. That cost is also included into the operation of that charger so that whatever company is operating it and maintaining it can still earn, at least operationally, a profit on it. So I thought that was kind of suspicious. Definitely, I think that should be more clear. Additionally, they mentioned for the deadhead miles that EV owners would need to travel considerable distances in order to reach public chargers. And yes, while 40% of US households do not have access to overnight charging where they park their vehicles, I think it's misleading here as well to imply that these people would even own EVs, or that the majority of them would even. And I suspect that this part of it is also a factor that led to their conclusion without being as realistic as perhaps what it should have been. So that's kind of where I'm thinking on this in terms of trying to figure out what was it that caused them to determine that EVs cost more to fuel. Some EVs absolutely would cost more to fuel than their ICE counterparts if you have to drive to a public DC fast charger that is a considerable distance away, or if you include the cost of your home charger and installation into the equation for only the first 12,000 miles. And as a final point, the additional taxes for registration to help pay for road maintenance is actually higher in the Midwest and Michigan than most of the rest of the country. So my suspicion is that they cherry-picked the places that would show that EVs cost more. And while factually that might be correct for people that live in those specific areas, and they do disclose that in the report, I don't think that's something that's entirely fair. And certainly, how many members of the media are actually going to read past the summarized findings at the top of this year's current report? Probably not many. So I did, and I think I discovered what could be the truth behind this, the underlying factors that were used in order to achieve the conclusion that I believe they were looking to achieve from the beginning. So hopefully you found that valuable, as I did dedicate a good hour to reading only this part of the podcast, just to do the research. So it took a considerable amount of time. As a result, I hope that you got a considerable amount of value from it. So that is it for the news this week. I do have more to come, including the question of the week segment right after this.
Do you own a business and want to reach EV owners and people interested in electric vehicles? EV Resource is welcoming businesses nationwide, both big and small, to become advertising partners with us across all platforms. The EV Resource podcast, magazine, YouTube videos, social media, and our webpage. For more information, please email Zach at hello@ev-resource.com.
All right, on then to the question of the week. Last week, I had asked you 3 questions, actually. What is your normal day-to-day usage for your vehicle? How many miles do you typically drive? And how do you usually refuel or recharge your vehicle? And the possible answers were less than 20 miles, 21 to 40 miles, or greater than 40 miles. Charging overnight on level 1, charging overnight on level 2, other public level 2 chargers, and DC fast charging. And then, of course, gasoline or diesel fuel was a final option for those who have a vehicle that use those fuel types. And the results across the board were rather evenly mixed, with very little variation between them. The only possible answer that was not used was charging primarily on DC fast chargers, which isn't too surprising, actually. I know only one person in my life, anyway, a friend of mine, that does this, and I'm not sure if he listens to the podcast. So, Ron, if you do listen and you didn't participate in the poll, well, shame on you. A few comments from last week. Andy Cooper said, quote, "I've been getting away with level 1 charging for about a year. It's been enough for the most part, but I would like the option to charge to 100% before a trip. To do that, I'd go to charge to 90% on a DC fast charger and then charge the remaining 10% at level 1 the night before the trip. With a level 2 EVSE, that would be a lot more simple. My level 1 setup has been a little risky with an extension cord, and I've recently found that the cord has been burning. This is despite the fact that my extension cord is rated for 20 amps and I was only charging at 15. It's time to do a proper level 2 installation," end quote. And Christopher Lawrence said, quote, "We drive the 2022 Model Y 40 miles a day every weekday and up to 200 miles per day on the weekends. We have a level 2 EVSE, but we still need the 3500 Duramax to move our fifth wheel and equipment trailers," end quote. So it's interesting, actually, that I can relate to both of these comments because I started my EV charging journey also by using the extension cord on level 1 for about a year and a half before the connection between the mobile charger, where it plugged into the extension cord itself, melted. So definitely not recommended. And I'm glad, Andy, that you're upgrading to level 2 because in addition to being faster, it will also open up more possibilities for you, and it's definitely safer. It's interesting, though, that I relate to Christopher's comment as well because my wife drives our Model 3, and we charge here at home on the 30-amp dryer circuit, and I've got some more to say about that here in a minute. But then because I sold the Spark, am back to a gas-powered car, and I fill up usually once or twice a month because I just don't drive all that much. So it's interesting that both of the people that commented, I can easily very, very much relate to those. Okay, so on then to this week's question of the week. I want to know, would you buy an EV from a Chinese brand like XPeng, NIO, BYD, or others? And I'm going to keep it to a simple yes or no, but I would encourage you all to feel free to elaborate on your answer of why or why not in the comments. The question, as always, can be found on the EV Resource Patreon page, pinned to the top to make it easy to find. You do not have to be a current Patreon supporter to participate. This is absolutely open to everyone. Now, back to the charging situation. I have something really important to tell you. It's a very important story. So to everybody who is listening right now who charges an EV at home, I need your full attention. Pause the episode if you need to until you can free yourself from any other distractions. This is probably the most important thing that I'm ever going to say on the podcast. Okay, now that I've gotten your attention, let me tell you a scary story about how I could have burned down my house and killed my entire family in the process. And that might sound like a little bit of an exaggeration, but honestly, that is very real. As I just mentioned a minute ago, I've been using our dryer circuit to charge the car. 30 amps. We've never gone above 24. In fact, most of the time I drop it to 10 or 15, something slower, because we don't need the car to charge in a couple hours. Overnight, 10, 12, 14 hours is perfectly fine. So for about 2 years now, when we wanted to charge the car, we'd unplug the dryer, plug in the charger. And then when we wanted to do laundry, we'd unplug the charger and plug the dryer back in. While this was inconvenient and sometimes meant that we forgot to plug the car in to charge overnight, it wasn't enough for me to spend the money on a smart splitter, a device that automatically detects the request for electrical flow, either the car charging or the dryer. And there's a primary and secondary appliance. So if the car's charging, but then you go to turn the dryer on, it will stop the car charging and then allow you to use the dryer. And then when the dryer's done, it'll switch back automatically to continue the car charging. Well, the smart splitter is only a couple $100, but to me, it wasn't worth the money for something that I could very easily just unplug and plug on my own. Well, I recently had a huge wake-up call. At the advice of Tom Malogny from the Inside EVs podcast, I decided to inspect the connector or the outlet, the receptacle that we were plugging into. And what I found actually scared me a lot, like a very traumatic experience. One, that receptacle was original with the house. It was the 3-connector NEMA 1030 outlet that used to be standard. And this actually would be from 1986. And that alone wouldn't necessarily be a massive problem. I mean, yes, electrical standards have been updated to the 4-wire connector, the NEMA 1430, that utilizes the ground wire. But even then, I would still have the same problem because we were switching the plugs constantly. We were wearing down the contacts inside the outlet. And to the point where when I inspected it, one of them was charred and the outlet itself overall just looked at the edge of failure anyway. So had I not actually inspected this, it likely would have at some point started a fire. And there's no smoke detector in the laundry room. So the fire would have very easily spread to the wall that the connector was mounted on and the ceiling inside that room. And that happens to be directly underneath where my wife and my bedroom is, where I sleep. So by the time any smoke would have made its way to the smoke detectors in the house, I'm not sure that my wife and I would have been alive. In fact, I'm almost convinced that we wouldn't have been. And I'm not entirely confident that the kids would have made it out of the house either. So, I mean, you could tell it still affects me. So what I did, I immediately went out and replaced the outlet with an updated NEMA 1430. That's just to stay up to date with code. But then also, there are a number of reasons why you want to utilize the ground wire for that type of circuit. And I'm going to be getting a smart splitter to eliminate the need to plug and unplug every day. The cost is very clearly worth all of our lives and our property and everything else. I mean, that is a drop in the bucket compared to the value of everything around it. So the moral of the story is this: whatever you have your EV charger plugged into, check it. Have an electrician check it if you aren't comfortable. Ideally, your charger should be hardwired. But if not, then at least make sure that you have the outlet inspected once a year to check for things like loose connections or charred bits, the screws that the wiring from the breaker box actually screw onto the outlet. Make sure that those are tight. They can back out over time, which then creates resistance, which builds up heat, etc. I've seen occasions where even an outlet installed by a professional electrician, over time, the screws worked out and it melted. So this is definitely something very serious. The equipment, like hardware, was never designed to be used for electric vehicles, and the amount of amperage over time can absolutely make a difference. So definitely have it inspected. Make sure that the screws are tight. Check for any signs of trouble. It absolutely could mean the difference between life or death, or at the very least, that your house is safer because you took just a little bit of effort to make sure that you're doing it right. I wasn't, and yeah, I dodged a bullet. I got away with it for 3.5 years of charging EVs in a way that you're really just not supposed to, with the extension cord in the beginning, and then with that outlet plugging and unplugging. With a smart splitter, even that isn't the most ideal solution, but it is one that is going to be a lot safer than what I was doing. All right, so to the end bits here, I've already thanked the Patreon supporters at the top of the show, but if you want to learn more about Patreon or take a look at the benefits of the different tiers of support, you can head over to patreon.com/EVresource, and the link is also in the show notes. That is the number one way to support the show, and easily the most direct way as well. And if you're not ready for that, but you still might want to help, and if you're already going to be going and buying some things for either your house or the car or books, toys, etc., I have a number of affiliate products and companies that they have agreed to support EV Resource when somebody purchases their products through the affiliate link that I have. I have a full listing of those links with the companies available on the EV Resource webpage under the Sponsors tab. The link to that is also in the show notes. And additionally, I've set up a separate section for the Amazon affiliate store, and that is ev-resource.com/store. Before I end the podcast for this week, I want to thank all of you who have been exceptionally supportive recently, as I've been super busy and skipped a few weeks. I am starting up a different company, and it has taken me away from EV Resource, but I'm not going anywhere, so EV Resource will keep going. But I want to thank you all for the messages and kind words, and if you or somebody you know knows anything about funding a startup business, I would love to talk to you about options that are available and any experience that you might have. This is one venture that I'm super excited about, but it is going to need a decent amount of startup capital, and the more people I can talk to about where to look for options like that, especially people that are familiar with the EV industry, as this business is also EV related. I'm just looking for conversations right now, and eventually connections to people that might be interested in investing as well. Other than all of that, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or complaints, you can email them to hello@ev-resource.com. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you all next week when I'm going to be back with another interview, and this one will be with Kevin Green. We're talking about the grid in the U.S. Specifically, actually, a lot of it is about the grid in Texas and all of the benefits and challenges that they have. So make sure you tune back in for that one.